Welcome to our study of Psalms. Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 97, Sovereign of Everything. First, a few opening observations. This psalm comes from Book 4, so we're nearing the end of the overall book of Psalms. This particular psalm is anonymous. It's not designated to any particular author. But Bullock calls this the Heavenly King category. This psalm seems to extol God as not only king over Israel, not only king over Judah, but rather king over the entire universe. It seems to be a set that is also known as enthronement psalms, psalms that focus on the reign of God over everything. And for example, Psalm 97 does open with "The Lord reigns." Just a little note about Psalms, that there could be a little enthronement collection in Psalm 96 through 99, because when you look at how they're uh, ordered, how they open, Psalm 96 says it's a new song, then 97, the Lord reigns, 98, a new song, 99, the Lord reigns. And these Psalms seem to focus on the kingship of Yahweh over everything, that it's timeless, it's over the whole universe, nothing escapes his sovereignty. Now, theologically, when we think of God and we try to explain who God is, a basic understanding of who he is that God is our creator, and he created the universe, and he is also the ruler and the redeemer of that universe, and ultimately he will be at the end. This particular psalm seems to focus on the ruler aspect. So there are three parts to Psalm 97. Verses 1 through 5 is that he is Lord over all the earth. Secondly, our response to him being Lord is that we proclaim him. And then the psalmist begins to apply it to our lives so that we become the righteous. So let's jump into Psalm 97. The Lord reigns, let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlines be glad. Cloud and thick darkness are all around him. Righteousness and justice are the foundations of his throne. Fire goes out before him and burns up his adversaries all around. His lightning light up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. Now, as one reads these first 5 verses, you should note that whereas earthly kings have some kind of limitation, they're really only king over their nation. Here, God is being described as the sovereign of the entire earth without limitation. And so immediately he focuses on God's kingship of the earth, not just Israel alone. When he mentions coastlands, or perhaps also being translated islands, this refers to lands far beyond Israel. Israel doesn't have islands. It's not known for being a seafaring place. So when he brings up coastlands, he's talking about distant areas. He then brings up a series of what is theologically known as theophanies. Now, theophanies are physical manifestations of God. Jesus is an incarnation. He is God in the flesh. But there were times that God manifested himself in a very physical way. And here the psalmist brings up that God is like a thunder cloud, a storm cloud, dark, thick clouds, that God is like fire in verse 3, lightning in verse 4, and even like a melting mountain in verse 5. And yes, that's wax, but the text does mention wax. And trust me, try to find a picture of a mountain melting on Google and you'll find volcanoes, which is not the case. So there it is. But all of these images are rather common images in the Old Testament for God's presence, a physical manifestation of God's presence. It also brings up his throne as the place of righteousness and justice, which has been brought up previously in other Psalms, that coming from him is the source of all righteousness and justice. So we get this great picture of God as sovereign over all creation. As we turn our attention to the next set of verses, verses 6 through 9, we read this: The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the peoples see his glory. All worshippers of images are put to shame, who make their boast in worthless idols. Worship him, all you gods. Zion hears and is glad, and the daughters of Judah rejoice because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, O Lord, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. Now, all of a sudden, there's this shift in motif. There's this shift in direction. Before, he was very, very earth-centered. He talked about mountains and fire and lightning and clouds and coastlines. It was geographical locations, but that God was over everything. There was no limitation. But now he shifts to celestial. The heavens declare this. And it could be poetic license, but I think what he's really trying to say is God is sovereign over not just the earth, but everything, even the heavens. And that is why in verse 7, there is this opening denunciation of idols immediately, and those who practice idolatry. And the word there is only for idol is only used one time in the entire book of Psalms, Fasel. And it's only used one time. The King James translated it graven or carved image. And so it's the idea that even if you are putting your boast in these idols, you are foolish, because even your gods worship Yahweh. Your gods are no match for him. Now, let's just take a quick note here on idols and their worship, because in the 21st century, and particularly in the Western world, the notion of worshiping an idol doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to many people. And so let's talk about idols just for a moment. That it's not just about their production. It's not simply about the way they were created, their carpentry, the gold, the metal workers, the stone cutters, the artisans that made a physically attractive or beautiful idol. It's not about that. But what it really came down to was this ritualistic preparation of the idol to be worshipped. And in fact, in most ancient cultures in the ancient Near East, a priest would swear an oath that they did not make the idol, that it isn't simply the production of the idol, it's the ritual that makes the idol representative of God. So, for example, in Assyria, a priest would whisper into the statue's ear to open up the ears, and then they would open up their eyes so they could see, and they would breathe into their mouth so that they could actually open their mouth. In fact, there's even an Assyrian statement that says, this statue without its mouth open cannot smell incense, cannot eat food, nor drink water. And so the priest, in essence, enlivens the idol. Similarly, in Egypt, who also had idols, they had a ceremony called the opening the mouth and the eyes, which was essentially the same as the Assyrian ritual that brought the deity to life, if you will. So the priests of both Mesopotamia and Egypt surrounding Israel daily washed, clothed, fed statues that were the living beings of the gods. And this is what the psalmist is getting at. Your boast is in these man-made items, graven images, carved images, and you don't realize that they are powerless before Yahweh, that they even worship him. And so back to our verse, in verses 8 through 9, the psalmist starts with Zion, then he brings up the daughters of Judah, and then all the earth. And that word daughters probably really means villages. It is the word for daughters, but sometimes poetically, the villages comprising the nation were called the daughters, as in Joshua and later in Psalms. Verse 8 is a welcome of the Lord's judgment. Why? Because these are not idol worshippers. They recognize God as the sovereign of all, the Lord is over all the earth, and therefore they welcome him because they're not like the idolaters. We then read here in verses 10 through 12, O you who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the lives of his saints. He delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Light is sown for the righteous and joy for the upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord, O you righteous, and give thanks to his holy name. Now, verse 10 basically says you hate what the Lord hates, you embrace what the Lord loves, and therefore there's the promise of preservation. He's going to deliver you from the wicked. But we also have to look a little bit further here because verse 11 throws a bit of an interpretive conundrum. That phrase, light is sown for the righteous. Light is sown for the righteous and joy for the upright in heart. You see, the problem is it's incongruent. Light and sowing don't mix. Sowing is an agricultural term about sowing seed. Light isn't sown. The Hebrew word there in the text is sown, za'ar. It's even found in the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible. That's the official Jewish text dating back thousands of years. Some people think this is possibly a scribal error, meaning that perhaps in the mishearing or misreading by a scribe while copying it, this word was put in place of what was originally in the text. What might that word have been? Well, the word shine, which by the way, light does shine, sounds very much like the word for sown. And therefore, it could be that in hearing it or looking at it, it's one letter off from the other, that the word should be shine, in which case it would be like light, light is shines for the righteous. But, it's a difficult translation. The NIV translates it, light is shed upon the righteous, to kind of avoid the whole issue of is it light or is it something else? And really of no help at all are other translations. The Septuagint, which is designated LXX, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was done several centuries before the time of Christ, as well as the Syriac version of the Old Testament and the translation done by Jerome, simply has the word dawns, which really doesn't help. So with Psalm 97:11, there is this translation issue because the word sown doesn't make sense when applied to light. But that is the word there, and it could be a scribal error, simply that the word shine was intended. Verse 12 seems to be what is called an inclusio, meaning something that goes all the way back to the beginning of the psalm and now finishes off the psalm. And it seems to fit because the Lord reigns, opens it, and at the end, let us rejoice. So if you've been using a journal to write down your answers, you might want to get your journal out right now. Just a few reflection questions for us today. How does the psalmist portray God in verses 1 through 5? How does it reflect your own portrayal? Is there anything you would glean from it that you hadn't thought of before? How would Psalms help inform your understanding of who God is? While some religions still make use of idols or images, in our culture, our idols may come in the form of possessions, prizes, titles. How can these distract us from focusing our life on God? How can we make the Lord exalted above them and make them worship Him? Put them in proper perspective. When do you rejoice in the Lord? When was the last time you recall His provision and gave thanks to Him? Once again, it's always a pleasure to share with you. I want to thank you for watching this. And if you have any questions, there's my email, my phone. And as always, you can come visit us at Heritage Christian Church or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hope to see you Sunday.